Hello chaps, Paul Curran here. I hope you and all our listeners are well. This week's Poetry Corner concerns itself more with titles of poems than the themes that they deal with. The title of the second of the three poems I'm going to be reading this evening was taken directly from the first poem, and the title of the third poem that I shall read, which was one of my own, is very similar to that of the second. That sounds very cryptic. Hopefully it'll be easier to understand after I've read the first poem, which is by the great Scottish writer Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson, author, of course, of Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is one of his poems. In fact, he asked that this may be carved onto his gravestone, and I'm sure I've read somewhere that President Roosevelt has the last three lines of this poem, Requiem, on his gravestone as well. Here it is, Requiem by Robert Louis Stevenson. It was written in about 1880, I believe, either in San Francisco, when Stevenson was on his way to try and marry Fanny Osborne, or 4 years later when he was in Samoa. Requiem. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live, and I gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse, you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. The discerning listeners out there, of which I'm sure there are many, will have detected the four words, this be the verse, which years later, in 1971, Philip Larkin used as the title for his poem, which really deals with birth in a sense that he suggests we try and curtail it, whereas the earlier poem has dealt with death, of course. This be the verse by Philip Larkin from High Windows. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. Tremendous poem by Mr. Larkin, who was once described as the grumpiest man in the supermarket. I think he said that he thought that poem, which may be regarded as his most well-known, had now become almost like a fairy tale or something part of the spoken word tradition, whereas most people know it or a version of it, and as such it's probably set to stay with us evermore. He said, I think, that he was looking forward to having a choir of girl guides recite it at his funeral. Typical Larkin fashion. Anyway, so we've had Robert Louis Stevenson's Requiem, and therein he says, "This be the verse you grave for me," which Philip Larkin borrowed in 1971, and which has subsequently been borrowed by Benjamin Zephaniah. This be perverse is a long poem of his where he asks Britain to embrace and favour politicians as opposed to being so disenfranchised and voting in opposition almost. That's by Zephaniah. And the third poem today is entitled This Be Reverse, and it is from my latest collection, Repeat Fees, His Only Sonnet. This Be Reverse. So, whose code for highway celebration is another bypass being proposed? How many more roads crossing this nation before all roads are permanently closed? Pollution confusion lets plans be drawn, new dual carriageway, adverse camber, meadow, river bends and hedges are torn as backhanders jump the lights on amber. Who's to blame for our journey's delay? We no longer ask, if we all agree, to daily jam like a bank holiday, because you're in your car, like him and me. Some love affairs run their natural course, but some hazard lights indicate divorce.